Welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh from The Wealth Stewards. In this podcast, Brent discusses some of the most important and interesting topics of the day as they relate to finance, the economy, and beyond. Now, on to the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh. Brent, good to be with you again. Lots of changes have been going on at the practice. I hope you're adapting and coping with everything coming your way.
Oh, it's all been good. And by the time our listeners will be tuned into this one, we'll be on multiple new platforms, Apple, iHeart, expanding far beyond where some of our original listeners were used to finding us. So we're really excited about that.
That's congratulations. Congratulations.
Well, I've got an awesome guest today, and we always will have maybe 2-3 minutes of banter before we start these conversations. And we already got one nugget of wisdom out of that. We go over this sort of pre-show review here, and one of the things we say is, this is a recorded show, and so if you say anything that you don't want to say, you can always pause it. The editing team later behind the scenes can go back and pull things out. And so I have Adam Ideson on, and we're going to talk a little bit more about his background. But when I gave him those instructions or that information, he responded to me, he said, not a problem. He said, you're responsible for the words that come out of your mouth. And I think that, I've learned a lot from this man, watching him teach my son as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, and he also owns several studios here in the Valley. And as I watch the class and I sit there and watch him dealing with these young kids, I'm walking away almost every single time with an absolute ton of knowledge, just watching him teach these kids not only a very physical art form and a martial art, but also the mental discipline that comes along with that. And so Adam's kind enough to join us today, and we're going to talk entrepreneurship. We're going to talk jiu-jitsu. We're going to talk about kids in today's society and a lot of other things. But with that, Adam, I'm going to give me a little bit of your background, and I'll let you introduce yourself to our listeners.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you bringing me on. I've been a fan of the podcast since I first learned about it. And I really love the diversity of people that you bring on the podcast. When you look at the title at first, it thinks it's all going to be finances, but you've really brought some unique individuals on, including in the financial market. And, being on the podcast, I'm a fan of the podcast. So thank you for what you're doing.
I really appreciate that. And it's interesting because when we started this thing, and we're almost 80 episodes now, the intention never was really to have it as a show about finances specifically, because I think, money, we live in an economic planet here, so money does drive everything. But what you find is people like yourself that have turned a passion or something that they're extremely interested in now into a vocation. I think it's absolutely a great topic for the show. And those kind of conversations end up spreading out into a broader picture of what your day-to-day looks like, and what the world that you're living in, the world you're occupying, is what's happening in that space. So thank you for listening, but also thank you for recognizing, we're not here to talk about growth versus value or saving for retirement. We can do that one-on-one, but this is more about the people that are out there and people that are doing great things, creating great things, and moving the ball forward for all of us. So thank you for that, though. I appreciate that. So what is your background with jiu-jitsu? Let's start there.
Sure. So I've been doing jiu-jitsu for a little over 13 years now. So not a really long time, but not necessarily a short time. And I got drug into it. And I say drug because I was drug into jiu-jitsu by a buddy of mine who's almost 8 years younger than me. And we grew up as neighbors, and our families were friends. And he had joined the Army 82nd Airborne when he turned 18. He did a couple tours in Iraq. And when he came back, he ended up living with me, needed a place to stay. Well, he kind of reacclimated to civilian life. And after a few weeks being in the house, he came downstairs one night and he's like, "Hey, man, there's a jiu-jitsu school downstairs and we should go." And I looked directly at him and I said, "You should go, and I'll see you when you get back." And, the idea for me is I really didn't understand what jiu-jitsu was at that point. Friends and I would watch the UFC, so I knew jiu-jitsu was in the UFC. And when he came downstairs, I was 30 years old at this point. He was 23 years old. And, he was a built up guy, physical guy. And I obviously, I'm a smaller individual and definitely was, I was in my 30s at that point. And I don't have any business fighting anyone, nor do I really have a desire to fight people. And after a few weeks of every day, this guy was on me. My other half said, "Why don't you stop being a baby and go to one class with him?" And what do you say to that? You say, "Okay, I'm going to go. I won't be a baby." And I went to my first class with him, and I got mopped up on this mat in the school by a 14-year-old kid. And I was just blown away. And in fairness, he was bigger than me. But the truth was, he just had been training jiu-jitsu for 5 years already. And I was taken to task, man. I got mopped up a lot by him and the other adults in the class. It was kind of a little bit of a grind. It wasn't not a kind environment to me at the time. And when I went home, I was thinking about a lot of things. And I was thinking, one, like, what just happened? I was pretty demoralized. I was checking, like, who am I? What am I? What just happened? And why was I not able to have control at any moment, at any point in time in the last hour and a half of my life? And I was fascinated by that. So I decided to go back. And after a few months there, I trained for about 3 months, 2 days a week. And at 3 months, I've been becoming more fascinated with it. Mind you, I'm not winning anything as far as like we're rolling, which is grappling in jiu-jitsu is called rolling. We're rolling and I'm just tapping a lot. And I'm just really getting kind of manhandled and doing my best to understand what's happening around me. At 3 months, I started training 3 times a week. And at 7 months, I became so fascinated with this art. I quit my job and all I've done is jiu-jitsu ever since.
What were you doing at the time when you started?
I was a retail monkey, so I worked for Home Depot for a lot of years, and I was a multi-unit manager for multiple businesses here in Phoenix. And honestly, I was doing fairly well as far as, when somebody would just look at the overall package of compensation, I was doing very well. But I was just too interested in jiu-jitsu, and I was pretty disenfranchised with the corporate ladder, if you will, and the corporate model. I grinded a lot of hours, and I just thought I was going to take a sabbatical and just do jiu-jitsu for a few months, and then I would figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I taught my first kids class. My instructor at the time invited me, after I'd been training about a year plus, invited me to start teaching in the kids classes. I said, sure, not knowing what I was going to get into. The following class, a kid that I'd worked with, his name is Matt. He brought me a drawing of he and I doing jiu-jitsu on just a pencil drawing. And the caption bubble he had drawn above my head, it said, "Great job, Matt." And he had a smile on his face in the drawing. And in that moment, I realized, like, I had just become a mentor or a role model, which I had never intended on being, never had envisioned that. And that was a real pivotal moment when I look back at it. It made me start to reevaluate, who am I and how am I living in this world? How am I setting what examples? And I started at that point making some changes in my life and my behaviors. And that became a really fascinating path that takes me to here.
Now let's talk about that a little bit, if you're comfortable with it. What kind of changes were you making in your life that might have sent you now in the trajectory that you're on?
Sure. I used to, I used to drink. I used to eat an unhealthy diet, stay up late, go out with friends, do the things that a lot of adults do. And as I was going through the process, I started to recognize that, who you are on the mat is who you should be off the mat. So this idea that, well, I'll come in and do my best to be this really, upstanding human, and whatever that would represent to somebody maybe from the outside, what their expectations may be of a martial arts instructor, of a jiu-jitsu instructor. I wasn't living that life necessarily off the mat. And that felt false to me. That felt hypocritical. And I was like, man, I have to do this the right way. A couple years into my journey, I met Henner and Hedon Gracie. At the time, it was called Gracie Academy. It's now Gracie University. And in getting to know Henner and Hedon, I really started to see that these individuals live the same life no matter what. And Henner and Hedon now are my head instructors. We're affiliated with Gracie University. I'm a certified instructor underneath the Gracie University banner. And I own 2 certified training centers here in Phoenix under that labeling or branding. And they set that example. And I was like, look, if these guys can do this and be successful, then I can do that too. And it really spoke to me. It wasn't about making a change because I'm supposed to. It really aligned with who I was. But being in the corporate game, I started working full time when I was 14 years old. And coming up the ladder in the corporate environments I was in, it was always about like going out to the dinners and going out for the drinks afterwards and this networking thing. And it was like, if you weren't in that cycle, then you really weren't being looked at. You weren't being considered for promotions and things of this nature. And that's not to say that that's wrong or bad. It was just the only lifestyle that I had known. So when I saw this lifestyle, it appealed more to me. I felt that I could be a better version of myself. And it took me on that path, not only to mentor children or to set the right example, but it's a better choice for me. It's a better choice for my life as well. So it's all encompassing in a positive way and in a better way.
There's so many things that you've just said there in that 5 minutes that I would like to dive into, and we're definitely going to talk about some more of that in terms of who this art has made you as a person. But I'll speak for myself here. If you had asked me a year and a half ago what jujitsu was, my answer would have been, it's that thing Joe Rogan does. Or, was not a guy that watched UFC very much. I didn't really know that much about it. So for people that might not have a clue what jujitsu is, can you give us a little background on jujitsu and what might make it different than taekwondo, aikido, other forms of martial arts?
Sure. And my perception, right? There are so many amazing martial artists throughout the world, whether they're doing jujitsu, taekwondo, Muay Thai, whatever it is that they're doing. And every art has amazing attributes to it. Every martial art has value. So when I meet a martial artist, it doesn't matter what you train or what you are. It's not a matter of one being better or worse. I'm just happy that another human being is doing martial arts and they're finding a path in that and maybe a lifestyle or something that's giving back to them. But for me, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the idea of it originally was it was a self-defense martial art. And, the history, the way I know it is that Elio and Carlos Gracie first learned Japanese Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil in the 1900s. And Elio was a very small kid, kind of a meek individual, full grown. He was my size, 5'9", 140 pounds, not a very big guy. And he learned pretty quickly that in Japanese jiu-jitsu, traditionally, if you were bigger, stronger, more athletic, you would tend to win. And if you were not those things, of course, well, the other end of that spectrum, you're losing. And he and his brother worked pretty endlessly at modifying and changing that art into something that, using leverage, using timing, modifying these techniques, he found a way to start winning and beating larger guys. And that was kind of where Gracie Jiu-Jitsu started, where the Gracie family started making a name, was that the smaller individual could beat bigger guys on a fairly regular basis. You fast forward a little bit, Elio Gracie had 10 children, which is a conversation for another day. And his eldest son, Horion Gracie, came up to the U.S., was one of the first guys to come up to the U.S. and start working to spread jiu-jitsu kind of to the world. And of course, at that time in the late 80s, early 90s, there was no internet, and people sometimes forget about that fact. So to get something to the world, you would go to hubs, you go to big cities, Los Angeles, New York, Paris, maybe if you're in Europe, but you would go to some place like this. So he came up to Los Angeles and he started teaching out of his garage. He started gaining some popularity that way, which is crazy today to think that some guy would walk up to you and just be like, "Hey, I teach this martial art you've never heard of. Would you like to come to my garage and learn?"
Sure. Yeah.
I think today
since
everybody
1970s
would say no. This is the late 80s, early 90s is my understanding for this. And after a few years, he had an idea. Horion and a couple other guys got together. Horion Gracie and a couple other guys got together and created what is now known today as the UFC. And Royce Gracie,
they created the UFC.
Yeah, Horion is credited with being one of the creators or founders of the UFC. That's correct.
No idea. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and really, a lot of guys will say, if you kind of just read up on it, a lot of people will say that the UFC was created really to showcase jiu-jitsu. That was its intention. And Horion had this idea that we would just start putting people into a cage and let them fight. And there was very few rules. There were no weight classes in the original UFC. And it was a bracketed thing. So you'd fight multiple fights in a night, where today you'd one fight per night, weight classes, a lot of rules. It's just a different thing. It's more of a athletic competition today. It's a sport for sure, where this was like, let's find out which martial art is the best. That was the idea behind it. And Royce Gracie, who is Elio Gracie's youngest son, went into that competition multiple times and won many, many times. And that was really what put Gracie Jiu-Jitsu on the map and demonstrated that a smaller, weaker individual could beat a bigger, stronger person in a fight. And that's really where it started to take off.
And so what do you think? I listened to Henner Gracie. Am I pronouncing the name correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. I listened to a podcast about a week or so ago that he was on, where to me it was very illuminating. He was talking about the differences between Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and some other forms of martial arts. And what he was saying was the goal with this is to get the fight to the ground. Because if you are, if you're in a traditional fight where you're striking somebody, you're betting on a lot of things. You're betting on the fact that punch is going, or that kick is going to land exactly where it should at exactly the right time. And a person with longer reach and perhaps bigger size is automatically going to be, they're going to start with an advantage, where you get down on the ground now and it's kind of the great equalizer. We talk a little bit about that in terms of the mechanics of jiu-jitsu and what makes it a little different.
Sure. Yeah. What you just said is spot on. And the idea that a bigger, stronger person who's got a longer reach has an advantage if you're standing. And when we think about just a human being, human beings are bipeds. So when we're on our feet, we are strongest. When you take somebody off of their feet, especially if they're a striker, they're limited in their tools because they're no longer standing. Once you get someone to the ground from a jiu-jitsu perspective, it's all about control, and you're using mechanical controls and not so much muscular strength, but mechanical controls, leverage, and technique to maintain and ultimately exhaust that individual, so that you maintain a dominant position and a safe position. From a self-defense standpoint, jiu-jitsu is all about safety. Jiu-jitsu, self-preservation, right, is self-defense. So the idea of how do I stay safe? Well, if I can take a bigger, stronger person to the ground, I'm already eliminating a lot of the advantage that they may have had. And when you think about, watching wildlife, for example, if you've ever watched Nat Geo or something like this, and you watch a lot, predators are grapplers and prey are strikers. The lion goes after a gazelle, the gazelle will kick and strike, and then it's taken off of its feet. And it's just that kind of a concept that you're going to grapple that thing off of its advantage and then maintain control until you get your victory.
That's yeah. I'd never really considered that actually. I've done a couple safaris over Africa. It's true. You look at any of the animals that are the prey, they're looking to try to strike out at the lion or the cheetah or the leopard or whatever it might be. Where really that animal that is the predator is trying to get you on the ground.
Yep.
That's
Yeah, it takes you down. Yeah, they all grapple at the end of the day.
So take me back to, so now you've really dove into this martial art.
Yeah.
How did you then move on to where you're opening your own studios? And when you first started, were you in Phoenix or were you somewhere else around the country?
Yeah, I was in Phoenix. So I'm a native, born and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona. Traveled a little bit, but I always come home. So I'm a desert rat for sure. And after a couple of years, like I said, I had met Henner and Hedon. I did some private lessons with Henner Gracie in 2012. And learned about this program, what they were doing at Gracie Academy at the time, Gracie University today. And I was really captivated by that. At this time, I had owned a couple of businesses as well, which we didn't talk about, but I was fascinated by their business model for jiu-jitsu, because what I was seeing in the school I was in was guys would come in and guys would go out, and there wasn't a very high retention rate. There was a very high attrition rate. People would come in and 1 month, 1 day, 3 months, and they would leave. And one of the reasons that I feel that was happening is that people were coming in with a desire to learn, and ultimately they were getting beat up on a pretty regular basis. And I'm not saying they're walking out with broken arms and fat lips, but what happened to me, where they're just kind of demoralized. You don't have a skill set for this, and you're just kind of thrown in. It's not horrible by any stretch of the imagination for me, but for others, it was just overwhelming. And what Henner and Hedon had designed very intelligently was this idea of separating beginner students from advanced students and giving beginner students a skill set, teaching them the fundamentals of jiu-jitsu in a non-combative environment initially, where they're not fighting for their life. They're not fighting with ego. They're just coming in and learning the fundamentals of technique. And when I looked at this objectively, I went, isn't this how we really learn everything that we get good at? Like, if you're going to teach your child to drive, even though they've been in the car, say 15, 16 years, when you're going to start teaching them to drive, you don't go, well, you've been watching this for like your whole life, so just here's the keys, let's go. It's a very step-by-step process. There's a learning process. Let's get comfortable in the driver's seat. Let's adjust the steering wheel. Let's learn how these mirrors work. Let's turn the car on and just feel what it feels like from that driver's seat. And that was really what they were doing in this program called Gracie Combatives. And it was also geared in self-defense. So many schools work in a sportive environment or competition-based jiu-jitsu environment, which is amazing. And that's the way that I started. And I think it's great. And for so many people, it's fantastic. But a lot of people that walk in the door of a jiu-jitsu school, and especially someone like yourself who brings your son in to a jiu-jitsu class, you were looking for your child to learn self-defense. And there is a difference between just grappling and somebody who's trying to punch you. And that is in no way to say that somebody who's an excellent sport jiu-jitsu practitioner or somebody who's training sport can't defend themselves. It's just a different path to get there. it's all fantastic. It's all great. It's just, what's the best alignment for you as an individual? And I felt learning about this system, I was like, man, I wish I had started that way. That makes more sense to me. And I feel that in my experience at that point, only a couple years in, that many people maybe would have still been in the school learning jiu-jitsu who had left because they didn't get this kind of systematic way of learning, and in a more safe environment where you're putting around just fundamentals. How do I do each technique? What does it mean? What is an indicator that would make me do that? And conversely, how do I transition from one technique to another technique when the technique I'm doing goes the wrong way, if you will? What do I do next? So I learned that system, and shortly thereafter, we started a certified training center. And as that continued on after multiple years, this was with my head instructor at the time. We started that school, and he and I separated a few years later, and I've continued the path with the certified training center. Now I own 2 certified training centers here in Phoenix, and we're pushing 600 students. We just opened our second one, just opened it in February. But before that, our first school, we were over 460 students in this very small box that you've been in. We have an 1,800 square foot school right now, but we're very, very excited to announce that we're expanding to 5,000 square feet. Construction is going to start this next month. And we're really looking to provide one of the most premier facilities for jiu-jitsu training in the Valley.
And one of the things I think that's important to note, and tell me if I'm incorrect on any of this information, but Helios Gracie, the founder, had 10 kids. You mentioned that.
Yes, Elio Gracie,
10 kids have kids, and there's grandkids and everything else. So there is literally hundreds of Gracies running around the country.
Yes.
And the Gracie University that you're talking about with Henner and his wing of the Gracie family is very different than what you might find. And you touched on it a little bit, but it's very different than what you might find with any studio that just has Gracie on the door. So I think it's an important distinction that not every Gracie Jiu-Jitsu studio is Gracie University in the format that you're discussing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. And all fantastic jiu-jitsu, to be very clear. It's simply a matter of alignment, right? Like, what are you looking for? Just like anything. There are grocery stores, they're all selling groceries. The question is which one appeals to you. And when you're learning something, it's just finding the right alignment. So there are many Gracies with many Gracie affiliations all around the world at this stage in the game, and they're all teaching fantastic jiu-jitsu. Our system is a different system than you'll find in most of those schools.
Now let's talk about at least the system, and you teach adults and you teach women and men and everything else. And I definitely want to touch on that. But what got me in your door was a good friend of mine, Jason, who we both know. Both of his sons went, and he's been telling me for the last 2 years, you got to bring your son here. It's incredible. But the program itself is called Bully Proof.
Correct.
And talk a little bit about that in terms of what the expectations might be for any parents that are listening out there that have a child that are looking to put them in something where they can be mentally and physically challenged, but also learn a useful life skill that they can carry forward. What's this program look like?
Yeah, so the Gracie Bulletproof program is our kids program. We start at 5 years old. So we have 2 programs, the Little Champs program, 5 to 7, and then the Junior Grapplers, which for us is 8 to 13. And in those programs, we're going to work self-defense. And what do we do in bullying situations? And the reality is that everybody at some point in their life is going to deal with some form of bullying. And how do you address that? And there's many barriers that we need to break down depending on the situation. But what I feel over the years of teaching kids, one of the things that's really fascinating is that children throughout their whole life are essentially told what? Don't get in trouble. That's like one of the priority things as a kid is like, I don't want to get in trouble. And I've learned that through whatever teachings I've had in my life. And then I'm also told on the flip side of that coin, if someone ever bullies you, stand up for yourself. I'm at school and I recognize that if I get in any type of confrontation, I'm in trouble. So now I'm in a tight spot. And that's even if the kid is willing to stand up for themselves. So the first part is self-defense starts with the belief that you are worth defending. So where are we with self-confidence? Where are we with belief in our own value? And that's something that we help instill or help reinforce with kids in those programs. So our objective is to be part of the village. The old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. If you as a parent choose to bring your child into our program, how do we support you as that part of that village? And because we are jiu-jitsu instructors, once the children get into the program, they do look up to us. They do listen to everything that we say to a certain level. Doesn't mean they'll do everything that we say, of course, but they're hearing it. And sometimes when a child hears something, or even an adult, it's always the timing and the delivery method, right? You may have heard something for years, but then one person says it to you a little bit differently at a different time, and now you start engaging in that. And that gives us that opportunity. And in some cases, that's their self-confidence. In some cases, that's understanding their self-worth and value. The other piece is that we have to get across to them that if you end up defending yourself at school, you're not in trouble at home. You will get in trouble at school, most likely. There's a zero tolerance policy in most schools. So if two children get in a fight, regardless of what the reasoning is, it doesn't matter if it's blatantly obvious the kid was being bullied, they're usually a suspension for both. So we have to really work to break down this concept with them that your parents have put you here. We are very much on board with you. We all support you. So we don't ever want you to be in a fight. We have rules of engagement for the kids that they learn. There's 5 rules of engagement that they learn. And the first one is avoid the fight at all costs, which means just because you're learning the art of self-defense does not mean you're a fighter. And it doesn't mean you're out looking for fights. It means you have the tools that if the fight picks you, you know what to do and you can stay safe. But in that, if they have to defend themselves, they just have to recognize that they're not in trouble at home. They're going to be okay. And I can't express to parents out there that it's really important that conversation is had many times, because we learn and receive information, and belief happens through repetition. So oftentimes a parent will say this, but they also don't reinforce it on a regular basis. And then the kid has no practical practice with this. So there's no role playing of what a bully may do or say and what an appropriate response will happen or should happen at that point. So we take that time in class that, yes, we're going to teach them the physical skill set of what are the most common types of physical behaviors that happen in a bullying situation or in an actual fight. And we teach them the skill sets to deal with that. But we also role play, what do you do in a verbal confrontation? What is your body language? What is your eye contact? What is your tone of voice? What is your ability to remain present under a stressful or a high demand situation? And how do we build them up? Well, we build them up through reps. We got to practice it. So if it really ever happens, they already know what to do. Their motor memory kicks in and they just go and they just do it, versus trying to find the right words or figure out what this feeling of nervousness or anxiety or fear may be because I'm in a situation where I feel threatened. So there's so many aspects to the Bully Proof program, but those are some of those aspects.
And I think along with it, not only the physical ability to defend yourself, one of the things that continually impresses me as well is just how much repetition you have with these kids about what they do, what they say, how they carry themselves, not only in the studio, but outside the studio matters. I know when you call on some of these kids, I always get a kick out of it. Like many of us are guilty of, they might start their answering with and you're really like, there's no ums in jiu-jitsu. But I think it's that really constant repetition that exercising discipline in all ways is incredibly important. To your point, one of the things that I think is very challenging today, perhaps more than any other time, with raising young kids, whether they're young boys, young girls, I think it's irrelevant at this point, is we've built a society, quite frankly, in the last 15, 20 years or so, with both the value system that we're putting out there and also the technology that we have, that I'll just be blunt and say I think is cruel to a lot of kids. From a bullying standpoint, I'm 50 years old now. When I was in high school, middle school, grade school, if you got bullied, you were embarrassed in front of maybe the immediate circle of people, and maybe they told stories about it after the fact.
That's right.
We're in this environment now where you could be embarrassed on a massive level, and the ability to digitally pile on to people, I think, is unprecedented in human history. Do you see any of that sort of, leaking into your interactions with the kids, and what maybe you have some experiences around that you could share?
Yeah, social media is wild, super wild. And you're correct in what you just said. When you and I were kids, there was no internet. So yes, if a bullying situation happened, maybe those intermediate people, the school knew, and it usually blow over pretty quick at some level, relatively speaking, every situation being unique. Sometimes it was torment for that child for their entire school year or for their entire time in school. That's very, very real as well. A lot of this
preserved forever.
It's there forever. And that carries into adulthood. It can be truly traumatic, and it can become a repetitive cycle. And with social media and digital bullying, it's a serious concern. It is a real thing. And I believe that parent engagement is critical on this. You cannot control what others do. You can only control how you respond and react to that. With that, social media for kids, I'm going to sound possibly, it may sound ridiculous, but keep your kids off social media when they're young. Like there really is a lot of toxicity in there. There's a lot of things in social media, which is probably not the right podcast for it. But when we look at social media, there's some amazing positive aspects of it. And then there's some really dark side to social media and to just being online in general for children. And even if your kid is not online, if something does happen, could it be posted and shared to others? Yeah. And that's very real as well. So when that type of stuff has occurred and does occur, parent partnership, school partnership, and getting into the school, when that stuff happens, we've had parents who've gone to the school, spoken with a principal or whoever made the dean of students in some cases. And that dean of students will bring in the parents of the other kid who's broadcasting that. And oftentimes even law enforcement is involved in cases because it is at a harassment level that needs to be addressed. You can't stop it. You can respond to it. The flip side of that is, how do we not become the target to begin with? And that's where that self-confidence comes in. At the end of the day, when we look at bullying, bullies are looking for easy targets, not hard targets. And if an individual seems to have low self-confidence, if that individual seems to not be willing to stand up for themselves, they will become an easier target. And we've seen that. I've been teaching kids for 12 years now. And you see this. So part of the program is, how do we develop a more confident individual who is not the target to begin with? And if they do get targeted, they're capable of shutting it down so quickly and confidently that that bully unfortunately moves on to somebody else, but at least that individual is protected at the time. And we've even seen situations where a child has been bullied and they have had to physically defend themselves, and later on became friends with that bully and brought that kid to jiu-jitsu and change the mindset entirely. So it's very, very possible to do these things. But the key is we're a very reactive society, and we would be better suited to be proactive. So it's very common for a parent or parents to bring their child in after a situation has happened, reactive. It is much more difficult to help that child come out through that trauma and come into a more confident self than it is to build that confident child in advance and have more of a preventative approach to this. It's almost like, putting the seatbelt on after the car crash. It's not as effective. And maybe preventing in the next crash or preventing injury in the next crash, it's helpful. But it's just that idea of jiu-jitsu, in my opinion, from a self-defense perspective, is a life skill. Swimming is a life skill. Self-defense is a life skill. And it is a skill that is built up over a long period of time. It's very common when school year is about to start that parents will call because their daughter's going to college in 3 weeks, in 2 weeks, their daughter's going to college.
Yeah.
And they call and like, hey, I'd like to get my daughter in for a self-defense class. I want her to be able to defend herself because she's going off to college when she's alone, and she's going to be alone. And of course we'll bring her in and we'll do all we can, because one class is 100% better than 0 classes.
Yep.
But when you think about the reality of a self-defense situation, you need a skill set that you can call upon immediately. There is not a lot of time to think about what I maybe should do. So when you're preparing a child, when you're preparing a human being for life, more is better, earlier is better. Repetition is the key to learning. And one of the things we could think about is, when speaking of children, when you taught your son the alphabet, how many times did you and your wife sing the alphabet song to your child? I don't know the answer to that, but it's many.
A lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And when that child starts, if they're just getting kind of a cadence to it, you're excited about it, right? They get to elemental P and it's like, meh, 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 and you're so happy that they just made that noise. People will post that on social media. Look, my kid's learning the alphabet. As children get older, as adults get older, we're under this impression that that's not supposed to be the way that we learn. We always learn through trial and error. We learn ultimately through a lot of failures, and we have to embrace those failures. So we need time to fall down. We need time to get back up. We need time to do this over and over again so we become better at what it is that we do. So the earlier that a child comes into jiu-jitsu, the better from a self-defense perspective, because they are more prepared should they ever get into that situation. That said, if there's a child who has been bullied or is in a state of perpetual bullying, bring them in, because we will help them. It will take time. It takes patience, but we can help those individuals become a better version of themselves and find the value that they truly have inside of them. And they will stand up for themselves.
Well, I think that's the key that you talk about, is showing these children that they do have inherent value. Because, I'll quote Jordan Peterson here. I think that he, in his rules for life, I forget the name of the title of that book, but number one rule is basically how you carry yourself. And also quoting Peterson, I think he said, a good man is a very dangerous man that knows how to exercise restraint. But we live in an incredibly energetic world in a lot of ways that I think is beyond what people see visually, quite frankly. And if you have that confidence internally, it does repel not all, but many of the situations that might come your way that you don't want. And we're these kind of broadcasting antennas in a number of different ways. And I think that what you're putting out there to a large degree can impact what's coming back your way. I want to wrap up. I could talk to you about the kids, and I do want to stress to anyone listening is you do a ton of adult teaching as well. It's a huge part of your business. But let's kind of wrap this up talking about entrepreneurship. And we're going to shift gears a little bit here. And tell me, what do you think, first, the greatest lesson that you've learned as an entrepreneur, but also the greatest challenges that you face today as an entrepreneur? And I'm not going to get into it because we've had this conversation with so many other entrepreneurs, but you were also running a business that was shut down, during COVID. And so maybe some of the challenges and triumphs that you've had through this entrepreneurship experience.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's broad conversation for sure. What I feel the most important piece is your mindset is everything. You have to believe. You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in your mission. You have to believe in what you're doing. If you don't, everyone will see through that. And I believe that one of the reasons I have such an amazing team of instructors and support staff and community around me is because they see that vision and they believe that I believe. They know that this is my heart. I'm heart forward with everything that I do. I put myself in 100% anything and everything that I do. And if I'm not in, then I'm all out. So that idea of moving forward all the time is critical. I also think that when I'm planning for what I do, when I'm working through the business end of it, it's people first. It's always people first. What is going to benefit the students? What is going to benefit the instructors? That is always the focus. There is no other focus than that. Everything else is an offshoot of that. And there would be tons of entrepreneurs that would disagree with that, from the aspect of you should be looking at your bottom line. You should be looking at your profit. To quote Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. And I really believe that we've created a unique environment of positive learning and positive growth, where when people come into the class, whether they're just parents watching their kids or they're the adults coming in or the women in the Women Empowered program, whatever it is, everybody leaves the class feeling better. And when we do that, how do we lose? We can't lose. We cannot lose. And to speak to that and your point about being closed, we were closed for 6 months during the pandemic, and we have a service-based business and it's a full contact business. So when we were closed, the idea like, hey, do you want to get real close and lay on top of somebody? Most people were in an absolutely not mentality at that time. And we closed. And again, speaking to the community, we stayed afloat because parents and adult students chose to continue to pay dues with no classes. We were offering some online services where they could do like solo movements and things like this at home. But the truth is, that's not Jiu-Jitsu. It was not what they were really paying for. And at the time, we thought we'd be closed for like a month, maybe 2. And at that time, we said, if you guys would continue paying dues, what we will do is, as soon as we reopen, we'll discount your dues at 10% every month until you're made whole again, so that you'll get that nut back. And ultimately, 138 individuals continued to pay dues for 6 months straight. And when we reopened, now 6 months, 10%, like this is going to take a lot of time to get that money all the way back. So we offered a bunch of seminars to offset some of that. We'll do seminars at no cost to those to try to work that back and still continue the discounts. And all but 2 people came back to us and said, we don't want any of our money back. We just wanted you to be open when this was done. So that spoke so much to my, it was phenomenal. Yeah. It was phenomenal. It talking about it still makes me emotional to a certain level, because that level of gratitude that I have for the people to see the value in what we were doing at that clip that they would give up financial resource during a hard time for everyone to keep us afloat and keep us alive it's unbelievable. I do not possess the vocabulary to express the level of gratitude that I have for the community that's around me, not just for that event in itself, but what I get to go to every single day. And it's because we've built something about people. And that's all it is. It's building about human beings and being the best versions of ourselves and supporting the people around us in the best ways we can.
Well, Adam, man, I would love to continue this conversation for several more hours. I learn something every time I speak with you, every time I attend one of my son's classes, and there's a lot more we could discuss. If people are curious about jiu-jitsu, about your studios, either, again, for the kids, but I also stress, what percentage of your business is adult versus kids in terms of just percentages? Is it 50% kids, 50% adults? What's the breakdown?
It's about 45% adults right now, 45% adults. And when we think about jiu-jitsu, a lot of people think of more of a male dominated sport, and it is a more male dominated sport, but more and more women are training. And I would encourage the female population here in Phoenix to come in and train in our women empowered program. We have over 100 women in that program right now. The energy is amazing. The self-defense is fantastic. The community is just on point. It's fantastic. And many of those women cross train. About 60% of the women that are in our WE or women empowered program train in the combatives program or the master cycle, which are the co-ed programs. So it's just a great place to be. Obviously I'm biased to it because I love it so much, but if anybody wants to come in that listens to this podcast, if you guys mention Brent, if you choose to come into the school, we'll give you a month of training completely for free.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you. And how do people find you? That's an amazing offer, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody comes in, they get a 10-day free trial. You come in, no matter who you are, you get 10 days free to just get a feel for the school. And we want you to come in and get a feel for the curriculum, the energy, make sure it's the right alignment for you before you ever sign up. But if you're listening to this podcast, we want to support Brent. So you guys get a month for free if you're a Brent fan. Outside of that, you can find us online, GracieJujitsuPhoenix.com, or if you want to abbreviate it, make it easier, GJJPHX.com. You can go right there and you can learn all about us. You can also find us at Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Phoenix on Instagram or Facebook. And we hope to see you guys here in town on the mat. We have 2 locations that we're very excited about, with the new location right off of the 51 in Bell. Our other location is at Tatum and Thunderbird if you're a local listener. And we really hope to see you guys come in anytime and just get a feel for what we're doing.
You have a phone number you can share?
Absolutely. It's a 480-339-9019. Again, it's 480-339-9019. I'll take you directly to the school.
Fantastic. Adam, thank you so much, man. I know you're incredibly busy running these studios. You got a major expansion happening as well.
Yes, sir.
And so the fact you took some time out of your morning to have this conversation means a ton to me. So thank you.
It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be here. It's my first podcast, so thank you for having me on as a first podcast. And
man, you were a seasoned pro here.
It was great.
Seriously, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're great, Adam. Thank you so much. I love listening to this podcast. I always find it entertaining. I always find it interesting. Just 2 things as we leave. The only other person I know that has practiced and studied the art of jiu-jitsu, actually, ironically, was a former colleague of mine, and it was a woman. She was a Vietnamese refugee, and she got very good at it, and she loved it very much, and she derived great benefit from it. It was terrific. And the other thing, I can't let this go by without just simply saying this, because it's alluded to a lot in this conversation. You can't buy self-esteem. You can't buy self-confidence. You can buy a lot of other things. You can buy milk, you can buy eggs, but you have to learn self-confidence. You have to learn self-esteem. And it has been my experience that martial arts is a tremendous way to do that. And thank you for the work that you're doing. Really appreciate it. Before we get out of here, Brent, we got from Adam how to get a hold of him. If anybody's listening to this who wants to talk to you, how do they do that?
Yeah, I'll share that. But I want to expand on your point really quick. I think that when you develop that self-esteem for yourself as well, it also it makes you, or it leads you, I think, to find more value in other people. Because if you can find value in yourself, that extends to finding incredible value in other people as well. It's like you value humanity as a whole. It's not just you, it's everybody. And I've found that with people that I've met that are incredibly self-confident, they're also incredible. They have incredible passion for other people as well, and it's like a generation effect in some way. I don't know if I'm articulating that correctly, but I think that's a great point, Bill.
No, you're absolutely dead right. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. People want to reach us. Our phone number here is 602-255-0555. We've got a couple websites. We can go to smartmoneysimplified.com or tws.finance. You can find us online. The only social media I'm really active on is LinkedIn, but we put a lot of content up there, so you can find me there as well. And I'd love to continue this conversation with you. So anyone that found this interesting and wants to talk more about at least what my experience has been with my son, I'm happy to have that discussion with him.
Fantastic. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time, you can do something really, really easy. You can reach out and hit the follow button. Become a subscriber. That way, every time Brent drops a new episode of this podcast, you're automatically notified and you can give it a listen. I would also personally ask that if you like it, if you find this podcast interesting and useful to you, tell people about it. Word of mouth is a tremendous promotion, and we really appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker, and on behalf of Brent and everybody at the Wealth Stewards, I want to thank you for listening today and remind you that you can go out today and make it a great day. Or not. It's your choice. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to Smart Money Simplified. Have questions about topics covered during the show? Visit our website at www.smartmoneysimplified.com or give us a call at 602-255-0555. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the Wealth Stewards or concurrent investment advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.